Good morning. Good morning. I'm all off to the wrong side here. I got up. It was hot. I had turned the air conditioning up to 72 last night, and I don't know why I would do such a thing, being the age that I am, but I did. And so then it was just unbearably hot to do the show. So I had to go and remedy that, and now I'm all out of sorts. It's okay. It's okay. Good morning. Good morning. Happy Wednesday. You've made it midway through your week. Congratulations. I really respect you for that. I know we've got some folks who watch who homeschool. I just want to tell you whether anyone else appreciates or respects what you do or not, I do, because I would be in the closet drinking by 10 a.m. I homeschooled my three for a while. They got behind in school, and so I pulled them out and got them caught up, which is interesting, that you can just easily do that. I think I had them home for a year, and by the time I sent them back, they were ahead. Of course, I can give them personal attention, but most of it was just them doing the curriculum. It wasn't, me standing over them. But I have so much respect for people who homeschool. I have such respect for the Amish because I hate gardening, and I'm not. I don't love homeschooling. I love homeschooling as an idea and for other people to do, but not for me. And so, yeah, wow, hats off to you. I know during the pandemic, I Facebook lived every day. I didn't know about Rumble, and I just kept getting censored and all this stuff. But all these moms would get on and um, they would talk about their homeschooling trauma, like how badly it was going. They're like, we've had, two temper tantrums. One child is in his room crying, and it's 9:15 in the morning, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. If I lived near you, I would bring you wine. I would help. I really would. Turn this up just a little. There we go. Um, Homeschooled Gypsy. I thought you were going out. So glad we could do it. So glad it's done. We have friends from the town that we used to live in, and they homeschooled. They've got one, two, three. They have three or they have four. All right, that's enough. Sophie, they're not actually fighting. She just has to act like she'll fight. Um, but anyway, they had three or four for some reason. I can't. Oh, in an hour. Okay. Um, I can't remember how many they look at the two older. Is there two? I can't remember. I think there's three. Anyway, they homeschooled them all the way through, and then the kids went to really good colleges. And the one is an incredible musician. I think I've shared his music on here before. It's TJ Lawson if you go to YouTube. But I mean, he's incredible. You see, I have my Nurse Penny podcast mug today. Somebody asked me how you get one of those, and I don't know. I don't even remember how I got it. Story of my life. I don't remember. I just don't know. I feel like I'm too far over on Rumble. Hold on. I'm going to see if I can scoot this camera a little bit. No, that's the wrong way. Let's see if that's better. I hate not being centered in the screen. It makes me a little crazy. Oh crap, that's worse. The cats rub against the camera. You know how cats do, how they have to cheek everything. There we go. There, that's better. Now we look like normal. Yay. Um, anyway, I don't remember what I was telling you. Let me pull our book up, and I know I usually chat for a minute, and I just need to I forgot to open the book, and I have to have that open so I can share that window with you. But anyway, it's been a good week. We got Don's bike ordered. We're getting ready to go camping, and so where are we here? We should be in chapter 8. Where is what happened? It went all. Oh, that's Lonesome Dove. Hold on. Give me a second. Close book. And what are we reading? Shame. There it is. Maybe. So we got Don's bike ordered. We're getting ready to go camping at the end of the month. Just a little 4-day trip. Right here, not too far from here. We're up to the lake. Yes, open the book. Of course. Why else would I click on you? There we go. And I don't know if anybody else talks to their computer screen, but I do. Yes. So he got an e-bike. I have an e-bike because I have got a bum knee, and Kentucky, forget it. If you've got a bad knee, you cannot bike. And so we saved and got one for me for Christmas. And he's been working overtime like crazy. And so he got one. And that's supposed to come today. And he's convinced I'm going to take it, and he might be right, because his is a total step through, whereas mine is like halfway up. That bar is like it's this way, but it comes about halfway up, and I have a really hard time getting over that bar. And his is a true step through. His is a 30 amp hour battery though, so it's going to have a lot more power. So I don't know that I want to ride his, because mine I think is crazy enough. But been out riding on it, and it's funny how motorcycles and bikes have some commonalities other than the two wheels. Like you do have to kind of tailor it to you, right? And I didn't know that. I thought, well, I'll just get on it and ride it and it'll be fine. Well, I was riding the other day and my hands were going numb, and today this pinky is killing me, and it's just from having this non-neutral wrist position. So when you hold onto the throttle and you pull it back, your wrist goes into this non-neutral, this is neutral. And so your wrist goes into this non-neutral position. And if you throttle, I got to figure out how to get the assist on without having to throttle the whole time. But anyway, it just kills my hands, and I've not been able to ride for like 3 days. But the cool thing I was going to tell you about this is, so I'm going to order some different handlebars, some swept back handlebars, and see if that helps. Don raised these to see if it would push me back further in the seat so I'm not leaning forward. But I was having trouble with seventh gear. I would put it into seventh gear and you could hear the chain slipping. And I don't know how to fix that. Don was worried about messing it up with the warranty, with it being an e-bike and the whole thing. And he's very mechanical. I was surprised he didn't just dive in. But there is a guy, and his name is Michael, but he's called Milky. Hold on. And he has a mobile bike fixing service. So if you're watching on Facebook, and you're one of my friends that lives close by, this guy drives to your house. If your bike needs something he can't do in your driveway, he puts it on his truck and he takes it back and he fixes it. And then he brings it back to you. And so I asked how much that was going to be, and he said $80. And I was like, all right. So he came out and he was able to fix it in the driveway and only charged me 40. Nicest liberal I've ever met. That's not true. I know a lot of my family are liberals and they're nice people. Um, but I'm going to get his little thing because I told him I'd give him a plug. And anyway, we stood out in my driveway for 3 hours talking. I can do it. And he had been in the military. He'd been blown up a couple of times. He delivered fuel to tanks and stuff. And 45 years old, just really, really interesting guy. Drummer, played drums for Korn. How cool is that? And so anyway, he was just telling me about his life, and we talked politics, and it was interesting, him being liberal and me being conservative, how many things we actually agreed on. Now he really thinks that Ukraine is stomping Russia, and I don't think there's any good evidence to that, but he's got some sources that are on YouTube that he thinks, he's like, now that we've sent all this money to Ukraine, they're really going to stop him. And I think he's wrong about that. Because they've already been caught embezzling that money already. They just got it. Like, when did Congress approve that? Not 2 weeks ago, I don't think. And so, yeah, they've already skimmed off the top of it. And but he's certain that Ukraine is going to win. And he's like, look, Russia's not really taken any territory. And I'm like, well, to be fair, they've not really pushed Russia back either. And he's convinced that most of the Russian army is dead, which I don't believe. But a lot of his beliefs are tied up in, what he knows of war, which are things that I don't know. And so, I listen to him because I want to hear someone else's perspective. And we were talking about the importance of having different perspectives. So it was interesting because he perceived himself to have different perspectives because he watches Morning Joe, and then he watches 3 liberal people on YouTube, and he can then fact check that with the mainstream media. And he's like, well, you can fact check it and find that it's all true. And I was like, oh, wow. And I said, well, technically, to be hearing all sides, because he's like, my dad listens to Fox News and that's just crazy. And I'm like, well, but technically to be listening to all sides, you would at the very least need to listen to Fox News and fact check that stuff. But it was just interesting to me that there are people out there who think that they are taking in a wide view of the issues, and they're watching Morning Joe and checking everything he says against the mainstream media. And I'm like, no, no, honey, you're just taking in one view from multiple sources. Um, But anyway, I was talking to him about the Trump cases and what's going on and how the government set him up with these documents and shipped these classified or told him to come pick up these documents that were part of his administration. And they had put classified documents in there. And so when they picked it up, they inadvertently took back classified documents. And then they got an FBI raid, got the documents back, and were like, look, he's got classified documents. Well, yeah, because you packed them up for him. And he was able to listen and was like, yeah, well, that doesn't make any sense. I mean, that case isn't going to go anywhere. And so I was telling him about the Georgia case and the New York case and the Alvin Bragg thing, which he thought was garbage. So it was interesting. And I said, well, you have to ask yourself, there's only a couple of things that could be going on. One would be that Trump is guilty of all of this stuff, right? And for some reason, they can't get him through impeachment and their court cases are falling apart. And I'm like, everybody thinks he's stupid. Well, you can't be stupid and be an evil genius. You can't have it both ways. So I said, so that could be the case, that he's guilty and all of this stuff is true and that he may or may not get caught, as is the case with criminals. And I said, another scenario would be that he's being persecuted and none of this is true. And the reason that they're going after him is because they don't want their way of life changed. They're all skimming the system. They're getting paid by all these lobbyists. They're insider trading. And there was the corruption with the Steele dossier, which turned out not to be true. And, is he going to go after them for all of this impropriety? And I said, so that would be scenario 2. And I said, scenario 3 would be there's some deep state process and they're rigging all of this to promote Trump and they're not going to prosecute him for anything. They're just making this big show to up his numbers. And I said, that I think we can cross that one right off the list. And I said, I feel like I've given you enough evidence about all of the falseness with the Steele dossier and what's going on in these other cases that makes you wonder, well, option 1 couldn't be true. And he's like, well, but what about the insurrection? And I said, did you know that Donald Trump approved the National Guard and that Nancy Pelosi refused to call him? And this is what he thought about that. He said, well, that's because he was going to use the National Guard to overthrow the government. And I was like, okay, how would he do that? Like, how would he do that? Nancy Pelosi would be in charge and Mayor, what's her name? Is it Bowser that's in D.C.? Mayor? I can't think of her name. But I was like, how would you, that doesn't even make sense. Like, so you're saying that he was colluding with every National Guard soldier or the leaders of those soldiers, and he was going to use them to overthrow the White House or overthrow the government, and that's why Nancy Pelosi didn't want to call them in, but then she eventually called them in? And I said, did you know that they took down his Twitter feed when he told everybody to go home, to be peaceful, to respect the men in blue? And of course not, because Morning Joe never said that. So it was just interesting. It was really interesting that was his perspective, was that he had all these different, he felt like he had a very well-rounded view because he watched Morning Joe and checked him against mainstream media sources. And I wouldn't even tell you to do that with right-leaning things. I mean, I listen to both sides and then I dig for information, and I try to dig for information from other countries. Like, what do people in Moldova say about what's going on in Ukraine? People that are much closer. What do the Polish people think? The Polish people are worried that Putin might encroach on them because Putin has a stated desire to return Mother Russia to her original glory, where she owned far more of the land than she does. And he said that in the Tucker Carlson interview. I don't know what he's willing to do to get to that point, but I mean, we just keep poking him and poking him and poking him. And I just think it's a bad idea. But anyway, just super interesting to talk to somebody that you could actually talk to, that was on the other side of the aisle. Right. I'm like, he's a military combat vet, and I do respect him, and he had told me he was going to charge me $80 and only charged me 40 and talked to me in my driveway for 3 hours. I mean, this isn't a scenario you would expect between a conservative and a progressive. You just wouldn't expect to see that. And I mean, he's really fearful that Trump's going to get in office and never leave. And I'm like, well, what evidence would you have of that? Because he got in office the first time and he left. And so anyway, it was just really interesting. You don't. I guess the liberals in my family are getting more open to it now that things are so bad. I don't think I think they see there's something hinky going on with what's happening to Trump. Good morning, Coffin. Um, but all right, for the love of God, stop it, Sophie. She's so insane. So anyway, it was just an interesting day. I got sunburned a little bit on my arm. Can't really see it. That's okay. Maybe I didn't get sunburned. I did. I got a little bit sunburned. I'm just, I'm just this. I don't know what level of pale you call bleached white tiger cheese level, short of albino. I've got the dark eyes and dark hair, so I can't meet the albino one. All right, let me pull up our book here. We are on chapter 8, trying not to talk past 10:45. I failed, as per usual. All right, let me make sure you guys can see that. Yes, no, I don't need the audio. Okay, we are on chapter 8 of the book Shane by Jack Schaefer. I have to listen to book club later. My work is getting strict about earbud and cell phone use. I can understand that. They want you focused on the job. You can catch us on rewind. All right. I'm a rosy ceramic. That's the most delightful description. Yeah, I think the foundation that I use is called porcelain or something. I mean, it's as white can get, just short of circus clown white. All right, here we go. Doggone it, I just switched the page. There we go. Chapter 8. Julian McCullough and Darwin Bruner rode into Jasper with the heavily loaded wagon, filled with everything from children's toys, men's suits, women's clothing, elixirs, pots and pans, to a wide array of other things for sale. McCullough's horse, good morning, let's get sewing. McCullough's horse was tied to the back of the wagon, and Bruner was riding alongside it on his horse. They headed for the first general store on Main Street they spotted and brought the wagon to a halt. McCullough climbed down from the seat and Bruner slid from the saddle. "So what if the owner won't buy anything from us?" asked Bruner. McCullough removed his hat and rubbed his head. "Then we'll try to sell some things to the people in town and then maybe one of the other stores." "We already got his money," argued Bruner. "Let's just leave the wagon and go to the saloon." "We will, but not until I try to sell some of that stuff in the wagon. It's got to be worth something." Bruner shook his head and made a sour face as they walked up the steps and into the store. The clerk was waiting on some customers, so they walked around and looked at things until he was finished. When the last customer walked out, the clerk walked over to McCullough, who was looking at a new hat. "I can give you a fine price on that," he said. He put the hat back on the rack. "We're salesmen ourselves and need to talk to the owner," said McCullough. "My name's Ralph. I own this place. Now, you two don't look like any salesmen to me." Bruner walked over to him. "What's a salesman supposed to look like?" he said in a sharp tone. The smile left Ralph's face. "I meant no offense," he stammered. "It's just that, well, most salesmen wear suits, and they usually don't wear six-shooters tied down. You two look more like gunmen to me." Bruner jutted his chin out to the clerk. "Do you want to look at what we have or not?" he demanded in a highly agitated voice. McCullough stepped between his hot-headed partner and the clerk. "My partner's tired and hungry, so pay him no mind," he said. "Now, we have all kinds of stuff in that wagon, and we'll sell whatever you want at a very low price." "How low?" asked the clerk. "How about you make us an offer?" All right, let me see what you have, he said as he walked to the door and went outside. McCullough turned to Bruner. Keep your trap shut and let me do the talking, he hissed. I don't like this, carped Bruner. carped Bruner. You're going to get us caught fooling around with that wagon. We got nothing to lose. Now shut up and let's see what we can sell. The two walked outside and found the clerk looking into the back of the wagon. McCullough walked down the steps, and next to him, Bruner stayed on the boardwalk and lit a thin cheroot as he looked around town. See anything you like? Asked McCullough. How much for the 2 large pots? He asked as he pointed to them. 2 bits? He said in an unsure voice. The clerk turned his head and smiled. I'll take 'em, he said. Now how about that sewing machine? $2. The clerk turned his head around again. You know, it cost me more than that for one of those at wholesale price, he said. Yeah, but we're getting kind of out of this business and just want to get rid of it all, lied McCullough. The clerk gave him a cagey smile. How much for the entire load, including the wagon and the mules? He asked with a businesslike smile on his lips. McCullough looked up at Bruner, who gave him a look that said he didn't care one way or another. McCullough put his hand up to his chin and rubbed it. I reckon $50, and that hat I was looking at in the store ought to do it, he said with a questioning look on his face. You have a deal, said the clerk, as he went back inside and got $50 out of the safe in his back room. He came out with the money and the hat that McCullough wanted. Do you need a receipt? Asked the clerk, as McCullough took his old hat off and threw it on the ground. Nope, said McCullough, as he donned his new hat and smiled at his partner. Let's go have a drink to celebrate. About time, he said, as he threw the cheroot into the street. The 2 thieves took their horses across the street to the first saloon they could find. They tied their horses to the hitching rail and walked inside. The clerk was up in the back of the wagon looking through everything. A customer walked up to the front door of the store, but he didn't see anybody. Hey, Ralph, you in there? He called out. Ralph popped his head out from the back of the wagon. No, I'm in here, he said. The customer turned around. Where'd you get the wagon? I just bought it off 2 men who sold it and all the merchandise in it for pennies on the dollar, he said as he climbed down from the wagon and shut the back of it. You want to make a buck? Sure, how? Take this wagon around to the back of the store and start unloading everything and put all the merchandise in my storage room. I'll get right on it, he said, as he headed for the wagon and climbed up in the seat. When the 4 of them rode into Jasper, Shadow veered off and went behind the buildings. Jess led the group along the street, searching for the jail. When he saw it, he headed straight for the brick building. The door was closed and there was a note hanging on a nail. Jess climbed out of the saddle, walked up the steps, and read it. Says the town marshal is out for the day, he said, as he turned around to the other 3. I haven't seen my wagon yet, announced Henry. We've only been here a few minutes, said Augie. I can go and check the liveries if you want. Jess nodded to him. Augie, you go and see if anyone sold a wagon and 2 mules. Jess told him before turning to Denoyer, you go and ride around town and look for any covered wagons full of merchandise to sell. The 2 turned their horses, Augie going one way and Denoyer going another. Do you think maybe they already left for another town? Asked Henry as he dismounted. Jess looked over at him and shook his head. I don't know, he said. Like he said, we just got here. Let's look around a bit. The marshal should be back later and he can help you if we don't find it here. We can't spend any more time going to another town. We have a job we're working on. I appreciate what you're doing, he said, timidly. It's just that my whole life is wrapped up in that wagon. Without it, I'm downright broke. Jess stepped off the boardwalk and handed him a silver dollar. There's a cafe across the street, he said. Go and get something to eat while we take a look around town. All right, and thanks again, said Henry as he headed for the cafe. Jess looked up and down the main street. The town was fairly busy. He saw a fairly large general store to his left and figured he might as well start there, hoping the two thieves might have tried to sell the stuff to one of the local stores. When he walked in and didn't see anyone in the store, he rang the bell on the counter. A man came out of the back room with a stack of women's dresses in his hands. "Can I help you, sir?" he asked. "Did you see two men come into town with a wagon loaded with supplies?" "Hey, Ralph, where do you want me to put these hats?" asked a voice from the back room. The man craned his neck around. "Just leave them in the back," he said as he turned back to Jess. "I knew it was too good to be true," said Ralph, as he put the stack of women's clothes on the counter. "I bought a wagon full of things to sell earlier from these two men. Said they was getting out of the business and wanted to sell everything cheap. I should have known. They didn't look like salesmen, looked more like gunmen to me." "Where's the wagon now?" "Out behind my store. I had one of my customers helping me unload it so I could take the wagon to the livery and sell it in the two mules." "Well, you might as well put the stuff back in the wagon because the real owner is in town now." "But I already paid them cash," he argued. "How much?" $50, and that included the wagon and the mules." Jess dug into his pocket, pulled out $60, and handed it to Ralph. "The extra 10 is for your labor of loading everything back into the wagon," said Jess. "Now, did you see which way the men rode out?" "They didn't. They're still in the Wheelwright Saloon across the street." He described the two men to Jess before he walked to the doorway of the store and saw the saloon. "They should have left town," Jess said, as he stepped off the boardwalk, slipping his hammer strap off as he did. Ruh-roh. It's fixing to get ugly. Chapter 9. McCullough and Bruner were sitting at a table, sharing a bottle of whiskey when Jess slowly pushed through the batwing doors of the Wheelwright Saloon. The barkeep stood behind the bar with a dirty towel over his shoulder and a sour look on his face. The only other people in the saloon were two older men sitting at a table drinking and minding their own business. Jess moseyed over to the bar, listening to the two men laugh and talk about their good fortune and the extra money they had to spend. Bruner was refilling their glasses when McCullough noticed Jess and all his weapons, which made his smile fade as he tapped his partner on his arm. "I can't pour any faster," laughed Bruner. "It's not that. It's who's standing at the bar looking directly at us," said McCullough. Bruner set the bottle down and turned in his chair. "Who is that?" he asked. "I don't know," said McCullough, "but whoever he is, he might spell trouble for us. Looks like a bounty hunter to me, and we both got a price on our head." "Maybe he just looks like a bounty hunter," said Bruner. "Anyone with enough grit to wear that many guns has got to be a gunslinger or a bounty hunter. Either way, it might be a good time to pay our tab and shuck on out of here." "Maybe we should ask before we finish celebrating," said Bruner as he stood up and removed his hammer strap. He strolled over to where Jess was standing, watching the two of them. Bruner took a pickled egg off the platter that was on the bar. He took a bite from it and chewed with his mouth open. Jess watched him, and when Bruner swallowed it, Jess smiled smartly at him. "Good egg?" he asked Bruner. "Yeah, pretty good." "So you two sold the pilfered wagon to the store owner across the street." "Who, me and my partner?" "You fit the description he gave me." "Maybe he can't see too well. We ain't took nothing." "You sure about that?" "Listen, mister, if you ain't wearing a badge, it ain't your business anyway," claimed Bruner. "I found the rightful owner of the wagon walking on foot this morning, and he gave me the same description of the... Oh, I'm sorry. I found the rightful owner of the wagon walking on foot this morning, and he gave me the same description of the two men who robbed him. Matches the store owner's description pretty good, down to the color of your shirts." "Maybe he can't see well either," debated Bruner. "Well, I can see just fine, and you two don't look like salesmen to me." "Now there you go, thinking we's the ones who took the wagon and all the stuff in it," he argued, as his temper flared. I didn't say anything about the stuff that was in the wagon, said Jess as he grinned at the two of them. McCullough sat there nervously. The bat wings squeaked open as Augie and Denoyer came strolling in. As soon as they did, they both stood by the swinging doors. Well, if it ain't Julian McCullough and Darwin Bruner, said Denoyer. Bruner turned to the two bounty hunters. What are you two doing this far east? He demanded as McCullough slowly stood up. Yeah, added McCullough. Last we heard you two was way out west of here. We're headed southeast on the trail of two wanted men, but now we done found you two, snorted Augie. So what? Debated Bruner. You think you can take us in? I don't think you got the gonads for it. If they don't, I do, said Jess. Bruner turned his gaze to him. Mister, you might wear all them guns, but that don't mean you can take the likes of me and my partner over there, professed Bruner as he pointed at McCullough with his left hand, while his right hand rested on the butt of his pistol. Actually, the only gun I need right now is this one, Jess said as he tapped his pistol with his right index finger. He cocked his head and grinned. And the only thing I need to know right now is whether or not you two are wanted dead or alive. He's worth 1,000, blurted Augie as he pointed to Bruner, and McCullough's worth 500. Shut your yap, Augie, hollered Bruner. Dead or alive? Pressed Jess. Alive, replied Augie, both of 'em. They ain't killed nobody, just robbing and taking things that don't belong to 'em. You want to take them into custody? Jess asked. You two want to take them into custody? Jess asked, as he continued to stare at the two men who kept looking back and forth between Augie and Denoyer and Jess. We done told you, we ain't getting caged, hissed Bruner. Either we walk out of here or we're going to start throwing lead your way. Hey, barkeep, asked Jess without turning away from the two men. What? He said from behind the bar. When is the town marshal... Oh, excuse me. Sorry. When is the town marshal coming back from wherever he is? He should be back shortly, he said. Jess glanced over at Denoyer. If it was just me, I'd let them walk out of here, said Jess. But if you two want to make some money, take them, and I'll make sure you don't get killed doing it. Bruner's face turned beet red, and he glared contemptuously at Jess. Who do you think you are, mister? He railed as he pointed to Augie and Denoyer. You come in here, threaten to put us in the pokey, and now you think you can stop us from going through these two knuckleheads? I do, he said bluntly. I'm going to enjoy putting a slug into that smart mouth of yours, spat Bruner as he reached for his pistol. In less than a blink of an eye, Jess slicked his pistol out and put a slug into Bruner and McCullough before either of them scraped metal against leather. Denoyer and Augie got their pistols out, but neither of them fired a shot. Bruner was blinking his eyes in disbelief as his head lowered to see the blood oozing from the hole in his chest. McCullough stumbled sideways and crashed down into a chair. He let out his last breath, slumped over it with his hair hanging down to the floor. Bruner slowly raised his head and looked at Jess with a curious expression forming on his lips. How'd you do that? He grimaced as a wave of pain racked his body, causing him to flinch. You shouldn't have tried to jerk that gun out, said Jess. Bruner's eyes rolled up in the back of his head as he fell backward and hit the floor in a loud whomp. Sawdust flew up in the air. Augie walked over to Bruner and towed him before turning to Jess. I was about to warn them about how quick you are with that leg cannon you got, he said. They wouldn't have listened anyway, said Jess, as he replaced the spent shells in his pistol and holstered it. They already decided in their minds that they were fast enough to beat all three of us. Jess walked over and rifled through their pockets. He found the money they had taken off Dukesbury, along with the cash from the sale of the wagon and mules. The batwing doors creaked open, and a tall man with a square jaw walked in, wearing a town marshal's badge and a concerned expression on his face as he saw the two dead bodies. "What happened here?" he asked. Denoyer smiled at the marshal. "We got wanted posters on those two. We was trying to take 'em into custody, but they decided to reach for iron instead." The marshal looked at Jess and then at the barkeep. "He's telling it straight, Marshal. Except that one there put lead into both of 'em before they even got their pistols out of leather," said the barkeep. The marshal's eyes focused on Jess again. "And who might you be?" he asked. Jess smiled at him. "Name is Jess Williams." A slow recognition came over the marshal's face as the name sunk in. "Didn't know you worked this far out from Texas." "I usually don't, but I had business here and met these two on my way back," he said as he nodded at Denoyer and Augie. The marshal looked around at everyone and sighed. "All right, then," he said. "Someone get the undertaker and let's go to my office and start the paperwork." Jess, Denoyer, and Augie followed the marshal out of the saloon. The marshal stopped in the middle of the street and glanced over at the cafe. "Can someone tell me why a timber wolf is sitting outside the cafe?" he asked. "That's Shadow," said Jess. "He's with me." "This day just keeps getting more and more interesting," mumbled the marshal as he started walking again. This is such a good read. I especially like Denoyer and Augie. Chapter 10. Jess, Denoyer, and Augie walked out of the jail and headed for the cafe, where Shadow still sat just outside the door. He stood up and waited for Jess to rub his head. "Why are you sitting here, boy?" he asked. He barked once and sat back down. Jess went into the cafe to see Dewsbury sitting at a table with an empty plate in front of him. Denoyer and Augie took a table and sat down. Jess walked to where Dewsbury was sitting. "I found your wagon and the two men who robbed you this morning," he said as he sat down across from him. "Where are they?" "Getting fitted for a pine box right about now." "That's what those gunshots were about?" "Yeah. They decided they didn't want to go to jail, so they reached for their irons, but it didn't go well for them." "What about my wagon?" "It's across the street behind the general store," he said as he pulled out the money he had taken off McCullough and Bruner. He put it on the table and slid it to him. "Here's the money they had on them. They sold everything to the owner of the general store. I gave the owner his money back and paid him to put all of the merchandise back in your wagon. You can go over there now because I'm sure he's finished." "I can't," he said. "That wolf blocked the door and growled at me every time I tried to leave." "He did?" "Yeah, I'm terrified of him." "He was probably protecting you from running into the men who robbed you. But I'm sure you can leave now," he said. Dewsbury stood up, shook hands with Jess, and thanked him several times for his help and generosity. When he opened the screen door, Shadow stood up and let him walk by this time. Before the spring-loaded door closed, Shadow shoved his nose through it and went inside. Several of the patrons gasped and stiffened at the sight of the huge animal. He walked to the table where Jess was sitting and curled up by his feet. "Good job protecting Mr. Dewsbury, Shadow," he said as he waved the waitress over. Augie and Denoyer got up from the table they were at and sat down across from him. "As soon as we get paid, we can continue the hunt for Ulrich and Purcell," Jess told him. Marshall said we should have our money by supper time," grinned Augie. "Maybe we should stay in town tonight." "Why? So you can lose your money in another poker game?" asked Jess. "Okay, so maybe we shouldn't have played poker with Colorado Dan," admitted Denoyer. "But if we play with the local men, we might have a chance to double our money." "You just never learn, do you?" asked Jess. "We gotta have some fun," argued Augie. "You can have all the fun you want after we put Ulrich and Purcell down." "All right. How about you collect all the bounty money from the marshal, and we'll just spend what we have on us," said Augie. "Fine. But I won't give one penny of it to you until we conclude our business," Jess said, as bluntly as he could. "I'm going to get a room at the hotel on the next street over. I'll collect the bounty money and hold it for you." Jess finally turned to the waitress who had been waiting patiently. He ordered, and so did the other two. Jess told her to bring out a large chunk of meat for Shadow. When she brought the meat to the table, Shadow stood up and sniffed the air. Jess picked it up and held it out. "You take this outside and eat it," he said. Shadow snatched the meat from him and headed out the screen door. Augie and Denoyer turned in their seats and watched him. "That dang wolf is smarter than you, Augie," chuckled Denoyer. "Probably," he muttered as the waitress brought them their food. They hastily dug in, and Jess watched them polish off their food in record time. They stood up, left some money on the table, and headed out of the cafe, leaving Jess to finish his meal. Jess left the cafe and took care of his horses before heading to the hotel to get a room for the night. Shadow followed him to the livery, but when Jess left, Shadow stayed back with the horses. He went to his room and took a nap. When he woke, he strolled out of the hotel and headed for Main Street to see the marshal about the bounty. Just as he rounded the corner, 4 men came riding into town. 3 of them wore pistols, but one man wore what looked like a saber or machete that bounced up and down on his right leg. The handle of a large Bowie knife stuck out from his hip. See a gypsy princess. He stood still and watched them ride to the Wheelwright Saloon, dismount, and stroll into the place as if they owned it. He slipped his hammer strap off and headed for the jail. When he walked in, the marshal was sitting at his desk and glancing out the window every so often, as he watched the saloon across the street. Jess sat down in a chair in front of him. "Expecting trouble, Marshal?" he asked. "Every time those 4 ride in," he said as he slid an envelope across the desk. "Here's your money, all of it." Jess picked it up, removed $40, and slid it to the marshal. "A little something for your trouble," he said. "Mighty nice of you." "Well, time for a drink," said Jess as he stood up and shoved the envelope into his back pocket. "I'm buying if you want to join me." "I think I'll take you up on that," he said as he stood up and donned his hat. They walked out the door in time to see Denoyer fly out through the batwing doors and land in the middle of the street, face down. The man with the machete walked through the batwings, holding the blade in his hand, the sun gleaming off it as he moved it around. "Yep, trouble," said the marshal. "I'll handle this," said Jess as he stood there waiting for what he knew was coming next. Chapter 11. The lanky man with the machete stood 6 feet tall under the black bowler hat that looked too small for his head. His denim pants were covered with leather chaps. He wore a red and white checked shirt that was opened at the top, revealing a thick mat of hair on his chest. His face was weathered and brown. His eyes seemed to protrude more than most, almost as if they were bugging out from the excitement. Denoyer rolled over onto his back as the other 3 men strolled out of the saloon, taking up position on the boardwalk as if they wanted to watch what would happen next. The tall man took the steps slowly as he waved the machete around. Denoyer's right hand clawed at his empty holster as he remembered one of the other men taking his pistol before they threw him through the doors. The man walked into the street, and when he got close to Denoyer, who was attempting to scoot away from him, he raised the blade in the air, holding it with both hands. His lips slowly curled up in a hateful sneer as he moved closer to Denoyer. When he stood over him, with his feet spread apart, he started the movement of lifting the blade even higher as the 3 men on the boardwalk cackled and cheered him on. "Steve, no. Before the blade started its downward movement, Jess slicked his pistol out and fired once. The slug screamed over the top of the man's head, between his arms and just below his 2 hands that gripped the handle of the machete tightly. The 3 men across the street stopped cheering and stiffened. The only thing that stopped them from reaching for their pistols was the fact that Jess still held his cocked pistol in his hand and a look on his face that said he'd use it. The man with the machete stepped sideways and off Denoyer, an angry look on his weathered face. Denoyer rolled over, stood up quickly, moved to the jail where Jess and the marshal were. "You missed," the man claimed as he pushed his chest out. He doesn't know when to shut up. The marshal went into his office, came out with a sawed-off shotgun and a firm look of resolve on his face. "I didn't miss," stated Jess. "That was warning shot. You only get one." "You'd shoot a man who ain't healed?" he asked. "The blade'll kill just the same as a bullet." "But I wasn't going to kill him, just scare the hell out of him for stomping on my feet." "It didn't look like that to me." The man looked at the marshal holding the sawed-off. "You interfering again, Marshal?" he asked as he tapped the machete against his right leg. "Only if I have to, but I think Mr. Williams here can handle himself just fine," he said in a solid voice. The three men stood on the boardwalk across the street with angry and tense looks on their faces. Jess's eyes moved from the man with the machete to the three men every second or two, closely watching all of their movements. "That's your name? Williams?" asked the machete man. "That's right. Jess Williams." "Well, Jess Williams, they call me Machete Mike, and I don't take kindly to someone pointing a gun at me." "Then I guess you shouldn't be waving that blade around at people." Mike moved a few steps closer to where Jess stood on the boardwalk in front of the jail. He moved the blade around in his right hand. "You need to know that I will shoot you before you can reach me with that," Jess said as he nodded at the gleaming blade. "You'd shoot me, even if I didn't raise it to you." "You have my word on it." "Even if I told you I wasn't going to use it?" "Yep." "I suppose that'd be considered murder," said Mike as he glanced at the marshal. "I'd say it'd be more like getting yourself killed for doing something you know you shouldn't do," Jess told him. Mike took 2 more steps toward Jess, who raised his eyebrow and clenched his jaw. "You're making a big mistake in judgment, Machete Mike," Jess cautioned as he pointed his pistol at his right arm. "I don't think you'll do it," he said as he moved another step closer. "And I'm telling you, I will," said Jess as he saw Mike lift his left foot to take another step, putting him within reach with the long blade. Before Mike moved his foot all the way, Jess fired, and the slug ripped into Mike's right arm just above his elbow. He dropped the machete and howled at the pain as he grabbed his arm and stumbled back a few steps. The marshal waved the shotgun around at the 3 men across the street, who were waving their hands around excitedly, making them think twice about going for their pistols. Mike glared at Jess as anger welled up inside him, fueled partially by the whiskey he had consumed in the saloon. "You shot me!" he screamed, as his eyes sparkled with hate. "I told you I would," Jess said as he kept the cocked pistol in his right hand. Mike stood there, looking back and forth between the marshal and Jess. His features tightened and his left hand moved to his side. "If you reach for that Bowie knife behind you, you'll die where you stand," Jess warned. Mike started laughing almost hysterically as he stood there defiantly, the crimson blood soaking his shirt sleeve. He stopped and moved his left hand behind him. When his hand started the movement of coming forward, Jess fired one shot that slammed into Mike's chest, knocking him backward into the dusty street. His Bowie knife flew aimlessly in the air, landing in the middle of the street. He landed in a dusty thud, and the marshal pointed the sawed-off at the 3 angry men across the street, who were pacing back and forth now, cursing under their breath. Jess glanced over at them and the marshal, who still held the sawed-off in his hands. "Got me covered, Marshal?" "Yes, I do. If they make one wrong move, I'll let both barrels fly," he said matter-of-factly. "Watch the skinny one on the left," advised Jess as he walked over to where Machete Mike was on the ground, waving his hands around in the air as his eyes darted back and forth. Jess moved to the side of him so he could still see the men across the street. Mike spat some blood out of his mouth. "You done killed Machete Mike," he stammered. "No, it was all the whiskey you drank and your temper that got you killed," he said. "I was just the messenger." Mike's eyeballs batted quickly for a few seconds and then became still as his eyes rolled up in the back of his head and the fingers of death wrapped themselves around his body. Jess strolled out into the middle of the street, replacing his spent shells in his pistol as he did. He holstered it and picked up Mike's bowie knife. The three men stood stone still now, and the marshal walked out into the middle of the street, 5 feet from Jess, on purpose to make a harder target. The skinny man on the left had dark, beady eyes that were closer together than normal, his right one wandering around seemingly on its own as his left one stayed in place. He spat on the boardwalk as a sign of defiance. "You men should get on your horses and ride on out," said Jess. "You killed our friend, mister," said the skinny man as he spat again. Jess glanced back at the dead body in the street before turning back around. He flipped the knife up in the air, grabbed it by the blade, and hurled it. The blade whirled through the air and sunk into the wooden wall behind the skinny man. Jess noticed that he hadn't even flinched when he did it, and smiled at him knowingly. "I knew you'd be the troubled one out of the three of you," he said, as he moved his right hand down to the butt of his pistol. "Your two pals there are nothing but bully boys, pushing people around. But not you. You're thinking about reaching for that Colt you have strapped to your right hip. But I gotta tell you, you'll never get it out of your holster." Shadow came out from between two buildings by the other two men. He jumped up on the boardwalk, pushing his ears back, and bared his fangs at them. They backed up against the wall and raised their hands up as they nervously looked at the huge wolf. "You two make the wrong move, and that wolf will rip your arms off," Jess warned them, without taking his eyes off the skinny man. He spat on the boardwalk again, wiping his mouth with his left shirt sleeve as his right hand crawled closer to the butt of his pistol. His right eye still wandered around. He leaned to his right and spat again, but this time he reached for his pistol, but stopped stone still as the slug punched a hole clean through his chest an inch to the left of his spine. The blood spurted out from behind him, splattering the wood as the slug embedded itself in the wall. The skinny man's wandering eye slowly stopped moving. That's a great description. Sorry. I'll read it again. The skinny man's wandering eye slowly stopped moving around as the man leaned forward and fell off the boardwalk. He landed in a heap of dead flesh in a ghastly fashion as his neck snapped. His head turned sideways as he rolled to the side, his glassy eyes staring at the orange sky of the sun making its way down over the horizon. Jess holstered his pistol and walked closer to the two men who were still pinned up against the wall and staring down at the wolf. "You two should get on your horses and ride out while you still can," he told them. They slowly and carefully stepped around Shadow, still keeping their hands up by their shoulders. Jess watched them run to the livery and ride out a few minutes later, heading around the livery and behind the buildings. The marshal and Denoyer walked over to where Jess was standing. Shadow jumped off the boardwalk and stood next to Jess. "Where the heck is Augie?" asked Jess. "When I came to, they had him tied to a chair whooping on him," said Denoyer as he rubbed the back of his head. Jess turned to the marshal. "Thanks again for standing by me," he said. "It was my pleasure," he said, with a funny smile. "Nice to watch how you handle a situation. You want a job as my deputy?" "Thanks, but no," Jess said, as he turned and headed for the saloon. "Let's get Augie out of that chair," he said, as Denoyer fell into step with him, Shadow bringing up the rear. Chapter 12. This thing's humming. The sun was up, but not much light penetrated the dense forest that Ulrich and Persolt lived in. They were eating a rabbit they had caught in a wire snare. Their encampment was fairly large, with a sizable lean-to in the center of it. They had built 2 chairs out of the saplings they had cut down to make room for the camp by tying the pieces together with leather thongs cut from a deer hide. Both men wore torn and tattered clothes that had been stitched up many times over. Their hair hung below their shoulders, and their faces were covered with bushy beards and mustaches. They had long ago stopped worrying about such things as shaving and bathing on a regular basis, even though they had good water supply provided by a nearby stream. Persault was gnawing on a piece of meat. The juices ran down his beard as he chewed. He made no effort to wipe it as he looked up at Ulrich. "You take first watch today," he said as he took another bite of the rabbit. Ulrich didn't speak, he just nodded his head. Conversation had become another thing of the past, with nothing new to talk about. When they finished eating, they tossed the bones off into the woods. Ulrich stood up and started for the tree they used for a lookout, picking his rifle up as he did. With the rifle slung over his shoulder, he began climbing the tall tree. They had built a comfortable sitting area about 30 feet up out of some wood from a wagon they had used to carry their supplies to the spot they'd picked out for their encampment. They had left the wagon in the woods when they couldn't drive it any farther into the dense forest. The 2 horses that had hauled the supplies had since been killed and eaten. Ulrich reached his spot in the tree and sat down, placing his rifle across his lap. He had a good view in all directions of the encampment, not that he thought anyone would find it. The only time that had happened was when a lone hunter wandered too close. On that day, the hunter became the hunted. They had chased him down and killed him with a hatchet. Down below, Persault finished cleaning up. He took the rifle and started walking out of the encampment, heading to the edge of the forest in hopes of finding someone traveling on the trail that went by close enough for a rifle. When he reached the spot, he sat down on the ground and waited patiently. He was dozing off when he heard something that stirred him. It was a rattling sound made by a wagon being driven by a lone man wearing a straw hat. Persault stood up and leaned his rifle against the side of a tree and waited for him to come closer. He fired, and the man in the seat slumped over. The horse pulling the wagon slowly stopped, bent down, and started eating the grass along the edge of the trail. Persault walked out of the woods and over to the wagon. He used the end of the barrel to poke the man, but he was dead. He grabbed the reins to the horse and pulled him into the woods through the clearing he had made for such purposes. After making 3 turns onto the trail, he was far enough inside that no one could see the wagon, or the other 3 that were in there from previous robberies. He hauled the dead man out of the front seat, throwing him over the back of the horse. He rifled through the boxes. Hi, Steve. Hi, buddy. He rifled through the boxes in the wagon. He found a few canned goods and some fresh-picked vegetables. He put them in a cloth sack and slung it over his shoulder. He picked up the rifle that was on the floor of the front seat, unhooked the horse from the wagon, and started leading him through the woods toward their encampment. Ulrich saw him coming back in from his perch. When Persault made it to the encampment, he tied the horse to a tree and emptied the cloth sack. "Whiskey?" asked Ulrich. Persault shook his head. Ulrich grunted and frowned as he turned around and looked in the other direction. He craved whiskey. So much so he had threatened several times that he would go to the town of Bassett to buy some with the money they had left. "Hi, little buddy. Are you mascot today?" When Jess and the other 2 bounty hunters rode out of Jasper, Dewsbury was busy selling his wares to some of the local townfolk. He waved at them when they went by. Shadow, who was walking alongside Sharps, ran over to him and sniffed his hand. He looked up at him and barked once, causing Dewsbury to drop the bottle of liniment he was trying to sell to a woman. Shadow sniffed the bottle and then ran back over to Sharps as they continued out of town to a trail that would take them southeast. Augie had several cuts and bruises on his face from the beating he'd taken. Denoyer had a lump on the back of his head that was slowly going down. They rode along the trail, Jess in the lead most of the time. After a few hours, Jess stopped and turned in the saddle, looking at something beyond Augie and Denoyer. They swiveled their heads around and looked at the trail behind them. "Something bothering you?" asked Augie. Jess pulled his spyglass out, extended it, and scanned the trail behind them. He folded it and slipped it back in his saddlebags. "I have the distinct feeling that someone is following us," he said, as he removed his hat and scratched his head. "Did you see anything?" asked Denoyer. "Not a thing." "Maybe your mind's playing tricks on you," suggested Augie. "Maybe," said Jess, as he put his hat back on and looked down at Shadow, who wasn't looking behind them or sniffing the air. "Shadow, go and check our back trail," he said, as he waved in the direction they had come from. Shadow barked and started running along the trail in the opposite direction until he was out of sight. "How does he understand what you tell him?" asked Augie. "I don't rightly know, he just does," admitted Jess. They sat in the saddle for a while, eating jerky and stale biscuits, until Shadow suddenly appeared out of some bushes with a large rabbit in his jaws. He dropped it on the ground in front of Gray. "Dang, Wolf can hunt too," said Denoyer, as he slid from the saddle and walked to the rabbit on the ground. "I can clean this in no time." He bent over to pick the rabbit up by the ears, and Shadow clamped his jaws on his forearm. "Whoa," stammered Denoyer, as he froze stone still. "I don't think he was hunting for us," chuckled Jess. "That's his supper, unless you want to take its place." Denoyer tried to dislodge his arm, but Shadow had his teeth clamped just tight enough that he couldn't do it without getting scratched from his fangs. He looked up at Jess with a strained expression. Will you tell him to let go of me?" he stammered nervously. "Let him go, boy," Jess told him. The wolf whined and released his grip. Denoyer stood up, rolled his sleeve up, and looked at his arm. There were temporary indentations on it, but no puncture marks. Shadow put his right paw on the rabbit, pinned it to the ground. Denoyer huffed as he shoved his shirt sleeve down and buttoned it. "Some kind of pal you are, keeping it all to yourself," he told Shadow, who barked once and cocked his head. If you want rabbit for tonight, you better go hunting for some," chuckled Jess as he watched Shadow pick the rabbit up with his jaws again. "Let's get moving and find a good spot to camp," he said as he took the lead again, keeping the horses at a slow gallop so Shadow could keep up with the rabbit in his jaws. Jess finally located a spot to make camp, almost a quarter-mile off the trail, where he saw some huge boulders and high bushes to give them cover. Denoyer worked the bushes and shot 2 rabbits for supper. After they finished eating, Jess started putting his cans with strings up around their perimeter, leaving one spot high enough for Shadow to walk under. Shadow made quick work disposing of his rabbit. After some coffee, they crawled into their bedrolls and fell off to a light sleep. Shadow curled up at the foot of Jess's bedroll. In the middle of the night, Jess felt Shadow move. He pushed his hat off his eyes and lifted his head to see him standing on all fours and sniffing the air. His ears were pulled back, but he didn't make a sound. Jess threw the blanket off and sat up, his pistol already in his right hand. "You hear something, boy?" he whispered. Shadow lowered his head. A few seconds later, Jess heard the first can drop, and Shadow took off running toward the spot. Jess heard a loud growl and a blood-curdling scream as the huge wolf lunged through the air. Chapter 13. The loud screaming and thrashing woke the other 2 men. Denoyer stood up and drew his pistol. Augie quickly threw a few pieces of wood in the glowing embers, and Jess walked over to where Shadow had hurled himself through the bushes. He walked around to see 2 men on the ground, flailing their arms in the air, trying to protect themselves from the wolf, who was biting them whenever they moved. Jess reached behind his left hip and produced one of his cut-down shotguns as Denoyer walked through the bushes with his pistol in his hand. You stop moving and the wolf will stop biting, advised Jess. Both men rolled over on their bellies and placed their hands over the backs of their heads. Come here, Shadow, Jess said. The wolf quickly moved to his side, but continued to growl at the men. Someone should shoot that crazy animal, cried one of them. The only one getting shot is perhaps one of you, said Jess, as Augie came over with a branch that was lit at one end. The two men rolled over onto their backs. The light was enough for Jess to see who it was. I thought you two learned your lesson back in Jasper, he said. You killed two of our friends, said one of them. Machete Mike got himself killed, and you watched it personal-like, refuted Jess. As for the other man with the wandering right eye, he wasn't going to leave without going for his gun. They was still our friends, moaned the other man, as he looked at his torn shirt sleeve and the blood on it. What were you planning on doing? Asked Denoyer. Not entirely sure, admitted the other man. Maybe rob you of that money you got paid for killing those men in the saloon? And plugging us in our sleep? Demanded Denoyer. I don't know. I don't think so, the man said in a hesitant voice. Who are you two? Asked Jess. I'm Eli and he's Ike, said Eli as he pointed to his friend on the ground. You two wanted for anything? Questioned Augie. Nah, said Eli. We ain't killers, just petty thieves. Jess glanced over at Denoyer. Take their gun belts and check for any other weapons, he said. Denoyer removed their gun belts and searched them. That's it, he said. Nothing else on them. Get up and move to the fire, ordered Jess as he waved the pistol around. They all moved to the fire, which was going well now. Jess made them sit back to back, and Denoyer wrapped a coil of rope around them several times. Augie tied their hands together with some leather thongs. Now what? Said Ike. We only have a few hours before daylight, so we might as well get some sleep, said Jess, as he scratched Shadow's ears. How are we going to sleep like this? Asked Ike. Fall down on your sides if you want, but don't try to get loose, cautioned Jess. Shadow will be watching you until daylight. Shadow got down on all fours and placed his massive head on his outstretched front legs, facing them directly. Is he going to bite us again? Asked Eli. Not as long as you sit still and don't struggle, said Jess, as he crawled back into his bedroll. Augie and Denoyer did the same, and Shadow stayed 5 feet away from Ike and Eli, opening his eyes every time one of them made a sound or moved. I knew this was a bad idea, mumbled Ike. In the morning, Jess cut the two would-be robbers loose and handed them some medical supplies so they could clean up the wounds they'd received from Shadow, who was sitting on his rear haunches watching their every move. When they were ready to break camp, Jess asked where they had left their horses and sent Denoyer to retrieve them. Jess threw 2 cans of beans on the ground and a small knife they could use to open them. Denoyer handed them one of the canteens from their horses. We're taking your horses and weapons, explained Jess. We'll leave your guns about a mile out on the trail, and we'll leave your horses about 5 miles out. And don't make the mistake of trying to ambush us again, because I won't be so generous next time. Don't worry, said Ike as he looked at his arm. I ain't letting that wolf chew on my hide any more. The 3 of them climbed up in the saddle and headed their horses out to the trail. Shadow barked at Eli and Ike a few times as if he was warning them before running after Jess and taking his usual position next to Sharps. The next several days went uneventfully. They made good time, and Shadow was able to keep up with them most of the time. Jess had watched their back trail and even sent Shadow to run back and look, but there were no signs of Ike or Eli. They were camped in a deep arroyo, sitting around a small fire and finishing a hot meal when Jess got up and checked his saddlebags. Where's the nearest town from here? He asked. Denoyer swallowed his last spoonful of beans. Little town called Compton, about 6 miles northeast, he said as he set his tin plate on the ground for Shadow to lick clean. Any other towns along the trail we're on? Jess asked as he came back to the fire and poured himself a cup of coffee. Well, there's the town of Bassett, but it's about 5 miles to the east of the spot where we think Ulrich and Persold are holed up, and that's a good 3 days' ride from here, explained Denoyer. We're going to have to divert and go to Compton to get supplies, Jess said, as he took a sip of the coffee. I'm running low on everything. Me too, added Augie, as he finished his plate and threw it on the ground. Shadow made quick work of cleaning it off. All right, we head there first thing in the morning, said Jess, as he put some sand on the fire, dousing it to a few glowing embers. The three rode into the small one-street town of Compton, Colorado, in the afternoon. Shadow walked alongside Sharps. A young boy walking with his father pointed to the wolf, and his father grabbed his arm and pulled him closer so he didn't run out into the street. Jess saw the jail door half open and headed for it. There was a sign on the window that said the town marshal was in Benning's saloon. Jess turned his horse and headed for the place that was several buildings down. They halted their horses in front of it and dismounted. Jess looked up and down the street before slipping his hammer strap off and walking through the batwings with Denoyer and Augie following right behind him. Shadow quickly moved under the batwing doors before they stopped swinging. The barkeep, an elderly man, dressed in a rumpled suit, pointed to Shadow. We don't allow dogs in here, he said, especially big ones like that. He's not a dog, said Jess as he glanced around the place. The barkeep narrowed his eyes as he looked at Shadow standing next to Jess. Is that what I think it is? Yeah, he's a timber wolf and he's with me. And who are you? Name is Jess Williams. Jess Williams? The bounty hunter from Texas? Yep. What are you doing in Colorado? Working with these two, he said as he nodded to Denoyer and Augie, who were taking a seat at a nearby table. Jess made his way to the bar and ordered a whiskey. Shadow followed him and curled up by his feet. The barkeep leaned over the counter and looked at the wolf. Got him trained pretty good, he admitted. How'd you do that? I didn't. He was trained by someone else. The barkeep poured a glass of whiskey, and when he finished, Denoyer walked over and took the bottle, along with two glasses the barkeep handed him. So who are you men hunting? The barkeep asked. Two men by the name of Ulrich and Persault, said Jess. The barkeep's mouth opened as he raised his eyebrows. Those two are cold-blooded killers, he muttered. I heard they ran all the way down to South America. Uh-huh, said Denoyer from the table. They's right here in Colorado. Really? That's what these two claim, said Jess. Where's the town marshal? Note on the jail said he was in here. The man pushed his suit jacket aside to reveal a crude-looking tin star with no lettering or indentations on it. You're looking at him, he said as he smiled wittily. Jess reached over and ran his fingers along the badge that looked like it was fashioned from the lid of a tin can. What kind of badge is this? He asked. I made it myself. Are you the duly appointed marshal of this town? Yep, I swore myself in some years back. You swore yourself in? Yep. I thought the mayor usually did that. You're looking at him, he said, grinning as he moved the other side of his suit jacket to reveal the stitching on his shirt pocket, proclaiming himself to be the mayor. Mighty lucky for you, eh? He said as he took a sip of the whiskey. Got any wanted posters in the jail? Nah, no one sends anything like that here because they don't know we have a marshal, he said. I'm Lucius, great name. Lucius Benning, by the way. Got anything to eat back there? Just beef stew, it's all I know how to make. Bring out 4 bowls of it, said Jess as he plunked a $5 gold piece on the bar. That wolf eats beef stew? Asked Lucius as he leaned over the counter again. Shadow lifted his head and looked up at him. All right, but let it cool down before you feed it to him, he said as they heard a young voice start screaming outside. We should stop here, but we're going to read 14. Chapter 14. Shadow jumped up and was the first one out of the saloon, followed by Jess a few seconds later. When he walked outside, he saw the young boy from earlier jumping around and screaming at the man who was sitting on his father in the street, pummeling him with his fists. Another man was standing there watching and holding on to the boy's collar to keep him from running to his father. Shadow ran straight toward the standing man. The boy heard something and spun his head around. Shadow hurled himself through the air and planted his two front paws against the back of the man, knocking him clean off his feet. He landed in the street on his stomach, hard. The man who was pummeling the boy's father snapped his head around to see Shadow hit the ground on all fours. He bared his fangs and growled at the man as he inched closer to him. He rolled off the boy's father and began scooting himself backward in the street as he clawed clumsily for his pistol on his right hip. Jess reached the boy, who was standing there, watching Shadow slowly moving toward the man scooting backwards. If you jerk that pistol out, that wolf will rip your hand off. If he doesn't, I'll plug you myself, he warned, as he glanced over at the other man, who was trying to catch his breath after having the wind knocked out of him when he landed face down in the street. And that goes for you too, mister, he said. He was beating my father for bumping into him by accident, wailed the boy, as he ran to his father and helped him sit up. Is that true? Asked Jess, as he looked back and forth between the two men, who were both sitting up on the ground now. Lucius, Denoyer, and Augie all came walking up. Lucius had a sawed-off in his hands. Hal Shep, what in tarnation were you doing whooping on Mr. Van Dever? He demanded. Hal, the one who had been knocked down by Shadow, looked spitefully up at Lucius. That dang tin star you made for yourself don't give you the right to ask us anything, he spat. Shep nodded in agreement as he kept watching Shadow standing there growling. I'm the law in town, and you'll listen to me, or I'll unload this greener, he threatened as he waved the shotgun around at them. Mister, get this damn animal away from me, demanded Shep as he glared directly at Jess. Come here, boy, Jess said. Shadow stopped growling and walked over to where he stood, his hand on the butt of his pistol. The boy's father finally stood up and brushed himself off. What happened, Mr. Van Dever? Said Lucius. Both Hal and Shep made ugly faces at the self-proclaimed marshal. I was walking with my boyhood when I bumped into that one there, he said, pointing to Shep. I apologized twice, but they pushed me into the street and started punching me for no good reason. Then that dog knocked the other man over and made the other one get off me. That ain't no dog, you nitwit, claimed Shep. That there's a timber wolf, and he should be shot for attacking us. No one is shooting Shadow, declared Jess. He was only protecting the boy and his father from you two ruffians. Shep glared up at him. And I don't see any badge on your shirt, mister, so you can kiss my behind, he said in a most belligerent manner. Jess fished around in his front pocket, removed his United States Marshal's badge, and held it out for them to see. Hal and Shep looked utterly dismayed. You're a dang United States Marshal? Asked Shep as he narrowed his eyes at the badge. Only when I need to be, and right now I reckon I need to be, he said as he dropped the badge back into his pocket. Dang our lousy luck, wailed Shep as he waved his arms around haphazardly. You two get up and get moving to the jail, ordered Lucius. You're really going to lock us up just for punching someone, demanded Hal. That's right. And if you can't pay the fine the judge orders you to pay, you'll stay in the hoosegow until the judge says he's good and ready to let you go, he said as he waved the greener around at them. You have a judge in this town? Asked Jess. Oh, no. Lucius smiled wildly. You're looking at him. I should have known, said Jess as he shook his head. So he's the marshal, he's the barkeep, he's the mayor, and he's the judge. That's great. That's some democracy they got there. I suppose nobody else wants the job, though. Come on, start marching, ordered Lucius as he stepped behind Hal and shoved the greener against his back, causing him to move forward. Denoyer and Augie walked closer to Jess. Is that badge for real? Asked Augie as confusion seemed to take over his face. Yeah, but I only wear it when I need to or when I'm called upon by the Marshal's Division. So you can be the law just about anywhere? Questioned Denoyer. Yep. You had that badge when you killed Colorado Dan? Asked Augie. I did. Then why didn't you pull it out and arrest him? Said Denoyer. Because that's not what Colorado Dan wanted, he explained. He wanted to try my hand, and there was nothing that was going to stop him from doing it except a bullet. Jess leaned down and scratched Shadow's ears. You did good, boy, he said as Shadow lifted his head to look up at him. Let's get you something better than stew. Let's get you something better than stew for you to eat. The three of them walked back to the saloon and waited for Lucius to return. When he did, he served 3 huge bowls of beef stew and a huge chunk of horse meat that he gave to Shadow. He took it outside, got down on all fours, and made quick work of devouring it. When Jess and the other 2 were finished, they paid Lucius for everything and walked out to find the young boy scratching Shadow's belly. Oh, that's sweet. His father sat on the boardwalk watching. He looked up at Jess. I want to thank you for saving me from a worse beating today, he said. Shadow was the first to run out of the saloon, said Jess. I like your dog, mister, the boy said as he looked up at Jess. Can I keep him? I told you before, Lude, he ain't no dog. He's a timber wolf, corrected his father. Well, he looks like a big dog. I know he does, said Jess, but he is a wolf. Enlighten. He can stay if he wants. I don't make him come with me. He just seems to follow me sometimes. We can't keep no wolf, Lude, lectured the father, and you got chores to do before supper. All right, said Lude as he wrapped his arms around Shadow's huge head and hugged him. Thanks, Shadow, he said as he kissed him on the head. Shadow licked his face and the boy giggled. Lude stood up and stuck his hand out and shook Jess's. Thanks again, mister, he said. You're welcome, Lude, Jess said as he pulled a peppermint stick out of his pocket and handed it to the boy, whose eyes widened with delight as he looked at his father. Can I have it, Father? He asked politely. He nodded, and Lude took it. He broke it in half and handed the other half to his father. Oh, that's so sweet. They turned and walked away, disappearing between 2 buildings. Augie looked at Jess. Ain't I ever going to get any of them candy sticks, he asked. Come on, I'll buy some more coffee when we supply at the general store. They have all kinds of candy sticks for sale. I'm buying my own since you 2 don't exactly share, grumbled Augie as they took their horses and headed for the store. And that's where we'll stop today. It's such a good book. So where are we? We're on chapter 15, and we've got... This one's going to go quick, I think. Oh, wait, we got 30 chapters. So we're about halfway through. So a couple more weeks and we'll have it, guys. Let me close that. Well, we'll just pop up here. Make sure there's not some emergency that my phone keeps texting like crazy. Make sure my brother, my parents are okay. Nope, just Mr. Whitroat telling me that I don't need to cook supper. Yay! I don't eat much, so if I don't have to cook, it's great because I can just eat something little. Gypsy Princess, thank you for the dono. Oh, I didn't even see that. Well, I hate that I didn't get to acknowledge her before. If you guys see Gypsy Princess in another chat, tell her that I saw the dono and thanked her. That was very sweet. Great book. I'm loving it. It's just such a change of pace, and I love it. I love it. I don't know if you guys like it or not, but if no one else listens, I'm enjoying it. That's all I've got for us today. I had our prayer list up at the beginning, and so you can go back to the beginning if you want to see that. I need to do some updates on that. We will be here Friday night. Oh, shoot. What was it that I wanted? Oh, I know. There's a video I'm trying to find that the chicks had. I may just have to steal it from the chicks because I can't find it anywhere. I'll email them and see if they can send me the link. But if you're here and you're here from Chicks on the Right, welcome. I'm the moderator for Chicks on the Right. And the new moderator, they didn't have one before. In the chat over there, if you previously watched Chicks on the Right and you wanted to participate in the chat, but the trolling and the bot behavior, and it wasn't actual bots, it was actual people, was so terrible that you just couldn't stand the chat anymore and you stopped chatting, or you stopped watching chicks altogether because you don't like to watch if you can't chat, go back because the chat is excellent now. All kinds of people over there. I don't allow any nonsense. Um, and the chat is just completely changed. I did a screen recording of what the chat was before they said I could moderate and sent it to them, and they just had no idea, and they didn't realize that um, that we can't that chatters, just chatters, not moderators, can't block someone because they're like, well, just block them because you can do that on YouTube, but you can't on Rumble. And I said, this is killing your chat community. You need to please let me moderate. And so I sent them a screen grab yesterday so they could see how productive the chat was. And it was just nonstop comments, all kinds of people who'd walked away from the chat came back. And I just love that. To me, part of Rumble, and I guess my mission in life is to build community. I feel like that got so broken down during COVID, and for me, reading these books and doing the Friday night show are just a way for us all to kind of get to know each other and love on each other, because we got so broken during COVID and so separated, and it just broke my heart. And I'm like, chat rooms were a big thing back in the 80s, 90s, I guess not 80s, 90s, early 2000s. I don't know. My history is terrible, but it was a big thing, and it kind of went the way of the dodo. And I've watched YouTube's chats, and YouTube's chats just seem to be people, like, they're not actually talking to each other. They're just throwing their comment out about whatever the show they're watching is saying. I mean, there are some that go back and forth, but a lot of times it's just everybody just throwing out comments. Whereas my chat, the there are other chats. Red Pill 78's chat. I don't follow a ton of different channels where I chat. Um, but the people actually get to know each other, and they pray for each other, and when someone's missing, people start wondering and looking in other chats for those people, and it really is a sense of community. It is community. And so that's just so important to me to build that with my channel, and it takes as long as it takes. My goal is just to keep providing, adding value, keep providing content that people enjoy, and um, bringing information that's helpful and needed and funny. And if, the numbers will work themselves out in the end. But I just want to thank you for coming to watch today. And I just so enjoy having you guys with me. And if you need to contact me, if you go to the description section, my email is in there. My website is also there. The COVID flu protocol is on my website. You can download it for free. It's all over the counter. I don't get any commissions or anything from that. That's just another thing that I'm doing to be part of community. I put that thing up forever ago. Um, and if you would like to support the show, and for those of you who do support the show, thank you so much. It just means the world to me. Um, our goal is to pull $8,300 a year. $8,300 a year would pay for the show. And that way I wouldn't be paying that. So right now we're still fronting it, but we'll get there. I'm not worried about it. God brings the increase when you're doing good work. But thank you, thank you, thank you to everybody who does donate. And if you'd like to donate, in the description section, you'll find links to my Cash App, my PayPal, and Venmo. And that's very much appreciated. And to everybody who prays for the show, thank you so much. Thank you to everybody who would take a moment out of their day to pray for this show or pray for me. I am just blown away by that. That's amazing stuff. And I pray for you. If you do need prayer, my email is in there. Send me an email. If it is something that you don't want to end up on the prayer list, make sure you put private in the subject section of the email. And then I will just pray for you in my own prayer time and won't add you to that group chat. And I think that's it. That's all I've got for today. So let me pray us out. Heavenly Father, thank you so much for today. Thank you for our wonderful mod, Enlighten, and for our donor, Gypsy Princess. That was so kind. And we just thank you for giving us this time together to kind of unplug from all of the craziness of the world and just get absorbed into a novel, into the life um, of Jess and Augie and the other guy that I can't think of his name now. Lord help me. But just thank you for giving us a fun time together to kind of socialize and just relax and not have to think about all the political stuff that's going on that we all worry about. And I just pray for everybody that watches the show live and for everybody who watches it on rewind. I pray for their families. If there were to be any division in their families, I pray that you would have your hand at that and would be resolving those divisions and bringing family closer together. Father, for anybody who's struggling with financial problems, we know you see those needs, and we pray that you're guiding those people to the solution for that problem. And we thank you so much for being God, our provider. Father, we thank you so much for your son, Jesus, and for his sacrifice for us so that we could all have a personal relationship with you. And we pray all of these things in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, guys. You tried to send me a rant, but I must not be signed in. I see you, sweetheart. So the way you do the rant, Let's Get Sewing, is it the first time you've done one? The way you do the rant is you click on the money sign under your name where the message goes. So when you click on the money sign, then you can type your message and you can select any amount of money you want, but you do have to add your bank card if you've not done that yet. So you would have to add the bank card. Um, Now, if you've done that somewhere else, sometimes Rumble will lock you out. I got locked out of Red Pills. I could leave comments, but I couldn't donate. I couldn't rant for some reason and leave a donation. So if that's the issue, um, you have to email Rumble about that. But if you can donate in other chats, then you can do it here. And if it's your first time, I'm trying to think. I think there's a video on my channel somewhere. Yeah, you have to add your card. So what'll happen is, I wish I could show you a screen grab. Let me think how to do this. Hold on a second. Well, I don't want to do that because just the last four of my card will come up. Hold on. Let's go over here. Let's stop that. Share screen. This. Share. Okay, let me make sure you can see this. Oh, I gotta crop it out. Hold on. Crap. What the heck? There we go. Okay. So now let me come over and show you how to do this. So the way you do it, make sure you can see. Yeah, okay. So here's this dollar sign. You click on the dollar sign, and then you just type your rant in here. Here is my rant, and say I'm going to donate $5 or $2 to myself. And then down here it'll say, let me see if you can see that. Yeah, please select payment. And so you push the down arrow, and then you got to select one of your payments, and then buy and send. And then it'll pop up and say rumble.com says, please confirm the donation. And I click OK. And there it is. But you can Venmo, yeah. But that's how you do it, just so you know. And let me stop that screen grab. There we go. Anyway, yeah, I think a lot of people, you're new to this platform. You don't know how to do it. I think, and sometimes things are a little bit more complicated than people who create a platform realize. I'm like, look, I'm 54 years old. I need to be walked through this. Let's see if that worked. Oh, there you got it. Great job. Thank you. Let's Get Sewing. Gypsy Princess. Penny Whitbroat. Thank you so much. We have the same name. What's up with that? Don't know. It's so weird. But anyway, I will see you guys. Thank you for the donos. I will see you Friday at 4:30 Eastern time for the Nurse Penny podcast. Yeah, you have to type the comment. You actually don't. I think you can actually send it blank, but I've never done that before because I talk. I will see you guys at 4:30 Eastern on Friday. If I don't see you there, I'll see you in the Chicks chat. And that's all I've got for you. Love you guys, whole big bunches. Nurse Penny, out.